The taste of recycled air and machine oil still haunts me from when I first accessed the forbidden archives beneath Terra. My name is Magos Explorator Thane-XVII, former servant of the Omnissiah, now keeper of truths too terrible for mortal minds. I discovered why our universe exists, why the endless wars, the suffering, the darkness must continue. You think that makes me mad, but you don't know what I've seen in the quantum depths of reality itself. They say the Emperor protects, but the real truth is far more complex. Our entire existence, every battle, every prayer, every death, serves a purpose beyond the material realm. The Warhammer 40,000 universe isn't just our reality, it's the universe's immune system, a necessary horror that prevents something infinitely worse from consuming all of existence. This is my testimony, recorded in the final moments before the Inquisition silences me forever. Chapter 1: The Mechanicus Revelation. The workshop hummed with the familiar symphony of servo skulls and blessed machines when I first encountered the impossible data fragment. Steam hissed from cogitator vents while the incense of sacred oils mixed with ozone from plasma conduits. For 3 centuries, I had served the Omnissiah faithfully, believing that knowledge was the highest virtue and that the machine god's wisdom was absolute. My augmented fingers traced across the hololithic display, showing the quantum mechanics equations I'd discovered buried within an ancient STC fragment. The numbers didn't make sense, not in any conventional understanding of physics or even the blessed mechanical truths of the Omnissiah. These weren't calculations for building better weapons or understanding the material universe. They were something far stranger, mathematical proofs that our reality existed as a containment protocol. Magos! My apprentice Zeta-12 approached with characteristic caution, his vox grill crackling slightly. His red robes bore the fresh oil stains of a morning spent tending to the workshop's machine spirits. The Fabricator General has requested your presence. He wishes to discuss the Explorator expedition to Genna Tertius. I minimized the display with a gesture, though my mind raced with implications. The fragment suggested that our universe, this grim darkness where there was only war, served as a buffer zone between ordered reality and something called the probability storm. According to these equations, without the constant warfare, death, and suffering of our realm, reality itself would collapse into infinite chaos. The corridors of Forge World Metallica stretched before us, a maze of brass and steel that had remained unchanged for millennia. Servo skulls drifted overhead like mechanical cherubim, their red sensor lights sweeping constantly for signs of heretical thought or unauthorized presence. The very walls seemed to pulse with the heartbeat of massive machinery, a rhythm that had become as familiar to me as my own augmented cardiac implants. As we walked, I found myself calculating probability matrices almost unconsciously. The fragment had contained references to something called narrative causality, the idea that our universe operated not on pure physics, but on story logic. Every Space Marine chapter, every Imperial Guard regiment, every Chaos incursion followed patterns that seemed almost authored, as if some vast intelligence was constantly writing and rewriting our reality to maintain specific dramatic tensions. The Fabricator General's sanctum occupied the apex of the Forge Spire, a cathedral of brass and crystal where the most sacred mysteries of the Omnissiah were contemplated. Servo arms writhed from the walls like mechanical tentacles, each one dedicated to a different aspect of the great work. The air here was different, charged with more than just electrical fields. It carried the weight of secrets. Ah, Thane-XVII. The Fabricator General's voice emerged from a mass of augmetics that barely resembled anything human. Your reputation for uncovering hidden truths precedes you. Tell me, what do you make of the recent fluctuations in the local warp currents? I chose my words carefully. The Mechanicus valued honesty, but there were truths that even they might find heretical. Fabricator General, I've observed unusual quantum resonances that suggest our reality may be more structured than we previously understood. his optical arrays focused on me with uncomfortable intensity. Several servo skulls descended from the shadows above, their Auspex arrays scanning me for signs of corruption or deception. The mechanical clicking and whirring filled the silence as he processed my response. Structured, an interesting choice of words. His Vox unit modulated to express something that might have been amusement. And what might be the source of this structure? Here was the moment of truth. I could retreat into conventional Mechanicus doctrine, speak of the Omnissiah's grand design and leave it at that. Or I could voice the heretical suspicion that had been growing in my enhanced consciousness since discovering the fragment. Fabricator General, what if our universe exists not as the creation of the Omnissiah, but as his tool? What if the endless conflict, the perpetual war, serves a function beyond our understanding, a function that maintains the stability of reality itself? The silence that followed was deafening. Even the servo skulls seemed to pause in their eternal vigilance. I could hear the distant rhythm of manufacturing processes, the heartbeat of the forge world continuing its eternal work. But here in this sanctum, time seemed suspended. Explain. The single word carried the weight of absolute authority. I activated my personal hololithic projector, displaying the quantum equations I'd discovered. The mathematical proofs hung in the air like glowing scripture, their complexity beautiful and terrible. These calculations suggest that our reality operates on principles of dramatic necessity rather than pure physical law. Every war we fight, every battle we win or lose, maintains a delicate balance that prevents something far worse from manifesting. The Fabricator General's multiple optical lenses whirred as they focused on the equations. His servo arms reached out to manipulate the display, rotating the mathematical structures to examine them from different angles. The silence stretched for long minutes as one of the most powerful minds in the Imperium processed information that challenged everything we believed about existence itself. Where did you acquire this data? His voice carried new harmonics, frequencies that suggested deep concern. Fragment Delta Epsilon 7 recovered from the Genna Tertius expedition. It was embedded within what appeared to be a standard STC pattern for lass weapon targeting systems. The encryption was unusual, almost as if it wanted to be found by someone with the right analytical capabilities. Something changed in the Fabricator General's posture. His servo arms retracted slightly, and I noticed several of the skulls had moved to positions that could quickly neutralize threats. Had I crossed some invisible line into heresy? Thane-XVII, what I am about to tell you carries the highest classification levels within the Mechanicus. There are truths that the Omnissiah has revealed only to the most trusted servants. Knowledge that would shake the foundations of the Imperium if widely known. My augmented heart rate increased despite my attempts at emotional regulation. This was the moment every tech priest both hoped for and dreaded. The revelation of mysteries that could either elevate consciousness or damn the soul. There are other fragments, other pieces of what we have termed the foundational protocols. They have been discovered throughout Imperial space over the past several millennia, always in the most unlikely places, always encrypted with mathematical structures that seem almost alive in their complexity. He gestured, and additional holographic displays materialized around us. Star charts showing the locations of fragment discoveries. Timeline graphs indicating the frequency of their appearance. And most disturbing of all, correlation matrices that showed how each discovery coincided with major historical events. The Horus Heresy, the Age of Apostasy, the Tyrannic Wars. The pattern suggests that these revelations are not random. Someone or something is gradually releasing information about the true nature of our reality. And if your analysis is correct, that nature is far stranger than even the Mechanicus has dared to contemplate. I studied the data with growing unease. The timing wasn't random. It was almost narrative in its precision. Each revelation came at moments of maximum crisis, as if reality itself was providing exactly the information needed to maintain dramatic tension while preventing total collapse. Fabricator General, who else knows about this pattern? Very few. certain elements within the Inquisition, a handful of High Lords of Terra, and now you. The knowledge is compartmentalized because of its implications. If the common citizens of the Imperium knew that their universe might be nothing more than a story being told by incomprehensible entities, faith itself could collapse. The weight of this revelation settled over me like a lead shroud. Everything I had believed about purpose, about the Great Crusade, about the Emperor's vision, all of it might be nothing more than elaborate plot devices in some cosmic narrative. Yet paradoxically, this made our universe more important, not less. If we truly were the buffer between reality and chaos, then every battle had ultimate meaning. What happens now? I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. Now, Magos Explorator Thane-XVII, you join a very small group of individuals tasked with understanding the true nature of our existence. Your analytical capabilities have earned you a place in the most secret project of the Mechanicus, Operation Foundational Truth. As he spoke, I felt something shift in my consciousness. Whether it was the weight of new responsibility or something more fundamental, I couldn't say. But looking at those quantum equations hanging in the air like prophecies, I realized that I was about to embark on a journey that would either save reality itself or damn my soul to forces beyond comprehension. The servo skulls resumed their patrols, the machinery of the Forge world continued its eternal rhythm, and somewhere in the vast darkness of space, the wars of the 41st millennium raged on, each battle potentially determining whether existence itself would continue. Chapter 2. The Inquisition's Secret. 3 months after my recruitment into Operation Foundational Truth, I found myself aboard an Inquisition black ship, traveling through the void between stars. The metallic taste of recycled air mixed with the distinctive ozone signature of psychic dampening fields as we approached coordinates that officially didn't exist on any Imperial star chart. Inquisitor Thane-XVII was not what I had expected. Where I had anticipated the typical stern authority of the Emperor's chosen agents, I found a woman whose augmetic eye implants held the same haunted quality I'd seen in the deepest machine spirits of ancient STCs. Her power armor bore not just the symbols of the Inquisition, but subtle mathematical inscriptions that I recognized from the foundational protocols. Magos Thane-XVII. Her voice carried harmonics that suggested vox implant modifications beyond standard Inquisition equipment. The Fabricator General speaks highly of your analytical capabilities. We have need of such skills where we're going. The observation deck provided a view of our destination through armored transparasteel that could withstand direct hits from macro cannon batteries. What I saw defied both my understanding of astrophysics and the blessed mechanical certainties of the Omnissiah. The structure ahead was clearly artificial, yet it predated human civilization by millions of years. More disturbing still, it seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, its geometry shifting in ways that made my enhanced optical sensors recalibrate constantly. "What am I looking at?" I asked, though part of me already suspected the answer would challenge everything I thought I knew about the nature of reality. "Station Omega-Null," Inquisitor Vex replied, her tone carrying the weight of secrets that had been buried for millennia. The oldest known structure in Imperial space, and possibly in this galaxy, it was discovered during the Dark Age of technology, but its existence has been classified at levels that transcend even inquisitorial authority. The station's architecture followed no known design principles. Spires twisted through what should have been solid space, while geometric patterns that hurt to observe directly covered surfaces that seemed to be made of crystallized time itself. Occasionally, entire sections would phase out of visible existence before returning moments later, sometimes in slightly different configurations. As our ship's servitors initiated docking procedures, I noticed that the station's gravitational field wasn't behaving according to standard physics. Mass readings fluctuated wildly, and there were temporal distortions that made my chronometer implants emit warning chimes. This wasn't just ancient technology. It was something that operated on principles that shouldn't exist. Inquisitor, I said carefully. This station appears to be violating several fundamental laws of physics simultaneously. How is this possible? Her augmetic eye whirred as it focused on me with uncomfortable intensity. Because, Magos, it doesn't operate on the laws of physics as we understand them. It runs on what we've termed narrative physics, the same principles that your quantum equations described. The docking bay that received our ship was vast enough to accommodate an Imperial cruiser, yet somehow gave the impression of being intimately small at the same time. The walls were covered in scripts that seemed to write themselves as I watched, mathematical formulas and what looked like story fragments in languages that predated human speech. Our escort consisted of figures I had never seen before, Inquisition agents whose modifications went far beyond the standard augmentations. One appeared to be partially phased out of normal reality, his outline wavering as if he existed in multiple dimensions. Another's eyes had been replaced with devices that seemed to show not what was, but what could be. "Welcome to the archive of possible futures," Inquisitor Vex announced as we walked through corridors that bent in directions that shouldn't exist. "This station contains the most complete record of why our universe must exist as it does." The central chamber was a sphere perhaps a kilometer in diameter, its walls covered entirely in displays showing what appeared to be every possible variation of our reality. I saw versions where Horus never fell, where the Emperor walked among mankind as a god, where chaos had never touched the galaxy. Each display showed a different story, a different way the universe could have unfolded. But as I watched, I noticed a pattern. In every timeline where peace prevailed, where suffering was eliminated, the displays eventually went dark. Reality itself seemed to collapse when the dramatic tension was removed, when the eternal war ended. "Do you see it now?" Inquisitor Vex asked, her voice carrying a weight that seemed to press against my consciousness. "Every possible future where our universe achieves peace, where the darkness lifts, ends in total annihilation. Not just of our galaxy, but of the concept of existence itself." I studied the displays more carefully, my enhanced processing capabilities working to comprehend the scope of what I was seeing. The mathematical models were beyond anything in my experience, yet they followed the same principles I'd found in the quantum equations. Our universe wasn't just a story being told. It was a specific type of story, one that required constant conflict to maintain narrative stability. Why? The question escaped my Vox grill before I could stop it. Why does reality require our suffering? Because, a new voice answered from the shadows. Suffering creates meaning, and meaning creates reality. The figure that emerged was something between human and machine, but neither in any way I recognized. His modifications weren't Mechanicus augmentations. They were alterations that seemed to edit his existence at a fundamental level. When he moved, reality around him flickered like a cogitator display experiencing minor corruption. "Allow me to introduce Chronicler Prime Zephyrian," Inquisitor Vex said with obvious respect. "He has been studying these phenomena for longer than our records extend." "Magos Thane-XVII," Zephyrian's voice seemed to come from multiple sources simultaneously. "Your discovery of the quantum fragments was anticipated. We have been waiting for someone with your particular combination of analytical capability and conceptual flexibility." I found myself cataloguing the impossibilities I was witnessing. This being, this station, these displays, none of it should exist according to any rational understanding of how the universe worked. Yet here it was, functioning according to rules that seemed to be written in real time. "The truth," Zephyrian continued, "is that your universe exists as a firewall against something we call the probability storm. It is a region of existence where all possible realities exist simultaneously, where cause and effect become meaningless, because every possible outcome occurs at once." He gestured, and the displays around us shifted to show something that made my enhanced visual processors struggle to maintain coherence. It was chaos in its purest form, not the chaos of the warp, which at least had purpose and direction, but true randomness, where every possible story was being told simultaneously. Without the focused narrative of your universe, the eternal war, the clear distinctions between order and disorder, the constant struggle against clearly defined threats, reality would dissolve into this storm of infinite possibilities. Your suffering creates the narrative coherence that keeps existence stable. The implications were staggering. Every battle fought by the Space Marines, every prayer offered by Imperial citizens, every death on 1,000 worlds, all of it served to maintain the story that kept reality from collapsing into meaningless chaos. We weren't just fighting for survival, we were fighting to preserve the concept of existence itself. But why us? I asked. Why does our particular story have this effect? Because, Inquisitor Vex answered, your universe achieved perfect dramatic balance. Heroes who are flawed, villains who believe they're righteous, endless conflict with just enough hope to prevent despair from ending the story prematurely. It is the ideal narrative framework for maintaining reality. She activated another display showing the psychological profiles of major figures throughout Imperial history. The Emperor, Horus, Guilliman, Abaddon, each one perfectly designed to play their role in the eternal drama. Too heroic, and there would be no conflict. Too villainous, and there would be no hope. The balance was mathematically precise. The question, Zephyrian said, his form flickering as reality recalibrated around him, is what we do with this knowledge. There are forces even within your own universe that seek to end the eternal war, not understanding that peace would mean annihilation. I thought of the recent Primarch returns, the technological innovations that might tip the balance too far toward order. If the Imperium actually achieved lasting victory over its enemies, if the suffering ended, reality itself might collapse. Who else knows? I asked, though I suspected the answer would be as disturbing as everything else I'd learned. Fewer than you might think, more than you'd hope, Inquisitor Vex replied cryptically. Certain elements within chaos understand this truth, which is why they never quite achieve total victory. Some of the Emperor's original plans suggest he may have suspected. And there are Xenos races who have built their entire civilizations around maintaining the balance. The weight of responsibility settled over me like the gravity of a neutron star. I had thought my service to the Omnissiah was the highest calling possible, but now I understood that there were duties that transcended even the machine god's will. The preservation of reality itself required that our universe continue its eternal dance of suffering and hope. What is my role in this? I asked, though part of me already knew that my life as a simple explorator was over. You, Magos Thane-XVII, are going to help us ensure that the story continues. There are those within your own Imperium who would end the wars, achieve peace, and unknowingly destroy existence. We need agents who understand the true stakes involved. As I looked around at the impossible station, at the displays showing infinite possible futures that all ended in darkness when peace was achieved, I realized that I was no longer serving just the Omnissiah or the Imperium. I was serving reality itself, helping to maintain the delicate balance of narrative tension that kept existence stable. The eternal war of the 41st millennium wasn't just our burden, it was our gift to the cosmos, a necessary sacrifice that preserved the possibility of stories being told at all. Chapter 3. The Chaos. Revelation. 6 months after Station Omega-Null, I found myself in a place that shouldn't exist, speaking with beings that represented everything the Imperium taught me to hate. The ritual chamber aboard the Word-Bearer's battle barge was a cathedral of flesh and metal, where chaos symbols pulsed with their own malevolent light. The air itself seemed alive, thick with the whispers of entities that existed beyond the boundaries of sane reality. Dark Apostle Malachar was not what I had expected from a servant of the Dark Gods. Where I had anticipated mindless corruption and raving madness, I found an intelligence that was disturbingly lucid. His power armor bore the 8-pointed star of chaos undivided, but etched around it were the same mathematical formulas I'd seen in the foundational protocols. the same equations that proved our universe's role as reality's immune system. Magos Thane-XVII. His voice carried harmonics that bypassed my audio dampeners and spoke directly to my consciousness. Or should I say, guardian of the eternal balance. Your reputation has reached even the depths of the Eye of Terra. The very fact that I was here, that Inquisitor Vex had arranged this meeting, challenged everything I thought I understood about the nature of good and evil. But the data was undeniable. Chaos forces had been maintaining the same delicate balance that we were, ensuring that neither order nor disorder achieved total victory. "You know why I'm here," I replied, my vox grill filtering out most of the emotion from my words. The servo skulls that normally accompanied me had been left behind. Their machine spirits couldn't function in this environment where the laws of physics bent to accommodate darker truths. Indeed, you seek to understand the true nature of our eternal war. Malakar gestured to the walls around us, where murals depicted not just chaos victories, but defeats as well. Scenes of word-bearers falling to Imperial forces, of chaos incursions being repelled, of the eternal stalemate that defined our universe. Tell me something, Magos. In all your centuries of service to the Corpse Emperor, did you never wonder why we never quite win? The forces of chaos command powers that transcend reality itself. We have demon princes who exist beyond death, warp storms that can devour solar systems, and the favor of gods whose attention can remake entire galaxies. So why does your pathetic Imperium still exist? The question struck at the heart of everything I'd been taught about the nature of our conflict. Imperial doctrine taught that we survived through faith, through sacrifice, through the Emperor's protection. But the data I'd seen suggested something far more complex. Because, I said slowly, working through the implications, total victory for either side would end the story. And without the story, reality collapses. His laugh was like the sound of worlds dying, but there was something almost relieved in it. Finally, one of the Corpse Emperor's servants who understands. Yes, Guardian. We serve the same purpose, whether we acknowledge it or not. Every battle we fight, every atrocity we commit, every heroic sacrifice your Space Marines make, all of it maintains the narrative tension that keeps existence stable. He led me deeper into the ship, through corridors that existed in more dimensions than my enhanced sensors could process. The walls were alive with symbols that wrote themselves, mathematical proofs rendered in blood and fire that demonstrated the necessary relationship between order and chaos. You see, Malakar continued as we walked, the dark gods are not the mindless destroyers your propaganda claims them to be. They are forces of narrative necessity, ensuring that your universe has sufficient conflict to maintain its function as reality's firewall. We entered a chamber that defied architectural possibility. Its ceiling stretched infinitely upward, while somehow remaining intimately confined, and at its center stood a device that looked like a fusion of Mechanicus technology and chaos sorcery. Brass gears turned alongside wheels of crystallized screaming, while data streams of pure mathematics flowed through conduits that seemed to be made of solidified time. "Behold the probability engine," Malakar announced with obvious pride. One of several devices distributed throughout the galaxy, each one monitoring the balance of forces that maintains our universe's stability. I approached the device with the reverence I usually reserved for the most sacred tech relics of the Omnissiah. My Auspex readings went wild as it attempted to process technology that operated on principles beyond Mechanicus understanding. The device wasn't just monitoring probability, it was actively adjusting it, making minute corrections to ensure that neither side achieved decisive victory. "How long has this been operating?" I asked, though I suspected the answer would be as disturbing as everything else I'd learned. "Since the Horus Heresy, the first great crisis where the balance nearly failed." Malakar's expression grew serious, an emotion that seemed incongruous on features marked by chaos corruption. When Horus fell to our influence, it wasn't random chance or simple ambition. It was necessary to prevent the Emperor's Imperium from achieving the kind of lasting peace that would have destroyed reality. The implications were staggering. The defining moment of imperial history, the betrayal that shaped 10,000 years of suffering, had been orchestrated not out of malice, but out of cosmic necessity. The Horus heresy hadn't been a tragedy. It had been a deliberate intervention to maintain the narrative stability of existence itself. But the Emperor, I began. The Emperor suspected, Malachar interrupted. Why do you think he allowed himself to be placed on the Golden Throne, a godlike being reduced to a half-dead corpse, providing just enough power to keep the Imperium functioning, but not enough to achieve total victory? The perfect dramatic situation. Hope without resolution, power without dominance. I studied the probability engine more closely, noting how its readings corresponded to major galactic events. Every time Imperial forces achieved significant victories, the device showed probability adjustments that would soon bring chaos incursions or Xenos invasions to restore balance. Every time chaos seemed poised for ultimate triumph, mechanical failures or unexpected Imperial reinforcements would arrive with mathematical precision. You're saying that every major event in galactic history has been scripted? Not scripted, Malachar corrected. Guided. There's still free will, still genuine choice and consequence. But the overall narrative arc is maintained through probability adjustments. Your Space Marines truly are heroic. Their sacrifices real and meaningful. Our corruption is genuine darkness. Our victories earned through actual strength. But the final outcome is always balanced to maintain the story that keeps reality stable. A new voice echoed through the chamber, carrying harmonics that made my enhanced hearing systems struggle to process audio that seemed to come from multiple dimensions simultaneously. The Magos begins to understand. What materialized in the center of the chamber was not quite a demon, not quite a machine spirit, but something that existed in the spaces between classifications. It appeared as a constantly shifting fusion of mechanical precision and organic chaos, its form rewriting itself moment by moment while maintaining an underlying mathematical structure. I am Equilibrium, the entity announced, its voice somehow managing to sound both digitally processed and formed by vocal cords that had never existed. I am the principle that governs the balance your universe maintains. I speak for neither order nor chaos, but for the necessity of their eternal dance. My enhanced consciousness reeled as I attempted to process what I was witnessing. This entity existed beyond the traditional categories of imperial theology and Mechanicus doctrine. It was neither blessed machine spirit nor corrupted demon, but something that transcended such limited classifications. Magos Thane-XVII, Equilibrium continued. You have seen the truth behind the Imperium's purpose and Chaos's function. Now you must understand the full scope of what we maintain. Your universe is not unique. It is one of several such narrative firewalls that prevent reality from dissolving into the probability storm. New displays materialized around us, showing other galaxies, other species, other eternal conflicts. I saw wars between crystalline beings that fought with weaponized mathematics, organic races that battled using evolution itself as a weapon, and civilizations of pure energy engaged in conflicts that lasted millions of years. Each of these narrative frameworks serves the same function, Equilibrium explained. They create focused stories with clear conflicts and meaningful stakes, providing the dramatic tension necessary to maintain reality's cohesion. Your particular galaxy was chosen because human psychology creates especially compelling narratives of sacrifice and heroism. The weight of this revelation was almost overwhelming. Our universe wasn't just protecting reality. We were part of a vast network of stories, each one told by different species, each one maintaining their own section of existence through dramatic necessity. But why show me this? I asked. Why reveal truths that could destroy the faith that makes our story function? Malachar and Equilibrium exchanged what might have been meaningful looks, though reading expressions on beings that existed partially outside normal reality was challenging even for my enhanced perceptual systems. Because, Malakar said, the balance is under threat. There are forces within your own Imperium that seek to tip the scales too far toward order. The return of Primarchs, new technologies that could end the eternal war, movements toward lasting peace, all of them threaten to collapse the narrative structure that maintains reality. And, Equilibrium added, there are entities from outside our local reality cluster that seek to exploit any instability. If the balance fails, if the story ends, things that make chaos look benevolent will flood through the cracks in existence. I found myself in the impossible position of standing in a chaos temple, listening to a demon explain why the forces of darkness were actually protecting reality from something infinitely worse. The mathematical models they showed me were beyond argument. Without the eternal war, without the constant suffering and heroism that defined our universe, existence itself would become vulnerable to entities that operated on principles of pure negation. What do you need from me? I asked, though I suspected my role as a simple explorator was about to become far more complex. Help us maintain the balance, Malakar replied. Use your position within the Mechanicus to monitor technology developments that might threaten narrative stability. Work with the Inquisition to ensure that neither order nor chaos gains too much ground. And above all, remember that sometimes serving the greater good requires actions that appear heretical to those who don't understand the true stakes. As I prepared to leave the chamber, Equilibrium spoke one final time. Remember, Magos, the enemy is not chaos or order, but the absence of story itself. Everything else is just details in the narrative that keeps existence possible. The transport that returned me to Imperial space carried the weight of knowledge that changed everything about how I viewed my purpose and my loyalty. I was no longer just a servant of the Omnissiah or a guardian of humanity. I was a protector of reality itself, charged with maintaining a balance so delicate that even understanding it fully might threaten its stability. Chapter 4. The Emperor's Gambit. The throne room of the Imperial Palace on Terra was not supposed to be accessible to someone of my rank, yet here I was, standing before the golden throne itself, while the psychic pressure of the Emperor's presence pressed against my consciousness like the weight of a dying star. The chamber stretched impossibly far in all directions, its architecture defying both physics and reason. Massive columns twisted toward a ceiling that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, while the very air hummed with energies that made my enhanced sensory systems recalibrate constantly. Lord Commander Guilliman stood beside the throne, his massive form dwarfed by the Baroque machinery that kept the Emperor's shattered body functioning. His expression was unreadable, but I could see the strain in his posture, the burden of ruling an Imperium while knowing truths that would break the minds of his subjects. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of centuries, but also a weariness that spoke of impossible knowledge. Magos Thane-XVII, Guilliman's voice echoed in the vast chamber. Your discoveries have brought you to the attention of the highest authorities in the Imperium. There are truths about our purpose that even I learned only upon my return from death. The Emperor himself did not speak with words, but his presence pressed thoughts directly into my consciousness with a force that threatened to overwhelm my enhanced mental partitions. What I experienced was not communication in any conventional sense, but the direct transfer of concepts and understanding that bypassed language entirely. You have seen the fragments of truth. Now witness the complete pattern. Reality shifted around me, and suddenly I was experiencing not just vision but memory. The Emperor's memory of choices made 10,000 years ago. I saw him during the Great Crusade, not as the infallible god figure of imperial propaganda, but as a being wrestling with impossible knowledge about the nature of existence itself. The vision showed me the Emperor in conversation with entities that existed beyond the boundaries of the material universe. Not the chaos gods, but beings that represented the fundamental forces that maintained reality's structure. I watched as he learned what I had recently discovered, that our universe served as a firewall against the probability storm, and that this function required eternal conflict to maintain narrative stability. I knew what would be required. The Emperor's thoughts continued to flow through my consciousness. The Horus heresy was not betrayal. It was necessary sacrifice. I allowed myself to be wounded, bound to this throne, because a God Emperor who achieved total victory would end the story that keeps reality stable. The revelation struck me with force that sent feedback spikes through my augmetic neural interfaces. The defining tragedy of Imperial history had been deliberate. The Emperor, with perfect foresight of what would come, had orchestrated his own apparent defeat to ensure that the Imperium remained locked in eternal conflict. Guilliman's expression had grown increasingly grim as he watched me process these revelations. "You begin to understand the true burden of leadership," he said. "Every victory we achieve must be balanced by losses. Every advance in technology or tactics must be countered by new threats. We cannot allow the Imperium to become too successful, lest we destroy the universe we're trying to protect." "Show him the Primarch protocols," the Emperor commanded, and Guilliman activated a hololithic display that materialized above the golden throne. What I saw was a detailed psychological and genetic analysis of all 20 Primarchs, but not as individual beings. Instead, they were shown as narrative elements, each one designed to fulfill specific dramatic functions in the eternal story of the 41st millennium. Horus was the perfect tragic hero whose fall would shatter the Golden Age. Sanguinius was the noble sacrifice whose death would provide meaning to loss. Guilliman himself was the responsible administrator who would maintain the Imperium without allowing it to achieve ultimate victory. Each of us was created not just as a military leader, Guilliman explained, but as a character in the story that maintains reality. Even the lost Primarchs were removed from the narrative when their roles became counterproductive to the balance. I studied the data with growing understanding and horror. The two missing Primarchs hadn't been destroyed by enemies or lost to chaos. They had been erased from history because their psychological profiles suggested they might have achieved the kind of lasting peace that would have ended the eternal war. "And the returning Primarchs?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. "Each return is carefully calculated," the Emperor explained. Robut's resurrection provided hope when the Imperium was too close to despair. Future returns will be timed to maintain optimal narrative tension, never enough to achieve total victory, always sufficient to prevent total defeat. The scope of the manipulation was breathtaking. Every major event in Imperial history, from the Horus heresy to the recent return of Guilliman, had been orchestrated to maintain the delicate balance that kept reality stable. The Emperor hadn't just unified humanity, he had created the perfect dramatic framework for an eternal war that would preserve existence itself. "But the cost," I said, thinking of the trillions who had died in 10 millennia of constant warfare, the suffering required to maintain this balance. Guilliman's expression softened slightly. "Do you think we don't feel that weight? Every death order I sign, every planet I condemn to war, I know that I am sacrificing real people to maintain a story. But the alternative is the annihilation of everything that has ever existed or ever could exist. The mathematics are absolute," the Emperor added. "Without the focused narrative of eternal conflict, reality dissolves into the probability storm. Every life lost in our wars saves infinite lives in infinite possible realities." Another display materialized, showing probability calculations that demonstrated what would happen if the Imperium achieved lasting peace. I watched scenarios where the successful defeat of chaos led to technological advancement, expanding human civilization, and gradually improving quality of life. But in every timeline, the same result occurred. Reality itself began to destabilize as the narrative tension that held it together was removed. The math was undeniable. Peace was extinction, not just for humanity, but for the concept of existence itself. "This is why the Mechanicus was guided to certain discoveries and kept from others," Guilliman continued. "Why certain STCs remain lost while others are found at precisely the right moments. Even your order serves the greater narrative, though most tech priests don't understand their true purpose." I thought of my centuries of faithful service, believing I was seeking knowledge for its own sake, or for the glory of the Omnissiah. Now I understood that even my research into the foundational protocols had been guided, that my discovery of the quantum fragments was not chance, but part of a larger pattern designed to maintain the balance. What is my role in this? I asked, though the question felt strange when directed at beings who had been orchestrating galactic history for millennia. You will continue your work with Operation Foundational Truth, the Emperor explained, but with full knowledge of the stakes involved. There are technologies being developed that could tip the balance too far toward order, weapons that could permanently defeat chaos, medical advances that could end human suffering, communication systems that could unite the galaxy in lasting peace, and all of them must be controlled or prevented, Guilliman added grimly. Not because they're inherently evil, but because their success would end the story that keeps reality stable. The weight of responsibility settled over me like the gravity of a collapsing star. I was being asked to actively work against human advancement, to ensure that suffering continued, to maintain conflicts that could theoretically be resolved. It was perhaps the most heretical role imaginable, serving humanity by ensuring its eternal torment. There are others who know, I asked. More than you might think, fewer than would be safe, Guilliman replied. Certain High Lords of Terra, elements within the Inquisition, some chapter masters who have proven capable of handling impossible truths. Even a few Chaos champions who understand that their role is as important as ours in maintaining the balance. The Emperor's presence pressed against my consciousness with new intensity, and I felt him searching through my memories, examining my psychological profile, testing my capacity for bearing impossible burdens. You have the mental fortitude required, he concluded. Your augmentations provide logical frameworks that can process paradoxical truths. You will serve as one of the guardians of the eternal balance. But how do we justify this to ourselves? I asked. How do we live with the knowledge that we're condemning our own species to eternal suffering? Guilliman was quiet for a long moment before answering. By remembering that the alternative is not just death, but the complete negation of everything that has ever mattered. Every act of heroism in our universe, every moment of love or hope or sacrifice, all of it exists only because we maintain the story that keeps reality stable. The suffering is real, the Emperor acknowledged, but it has meaning. Without the eternal war, without the darkness and the light that defines us, existence itself becomes impossible. We choose meaningful suffering over meaningless oblivion. As I prepared to leave the throne room, carrying knowledge that would change everything about how I viewed my purpose, the Emperor shared one final thought. Remember, Magos, we do not serve the Imperium or humanity, or even the Omnissiah. We serve the story itself, the great narrative that allows anything to exist at all. All other loyalties are secondary to this fundamental duty. The transport that carried me away from the Imperial Palace bore the weight of ultimate responsibility. I was no longer just a tech priest or even a guardian of the eternal balance. I was a protector of the story that made stories possible, charged with ensuring that the narrative framework of existence itself never reached its conclusion. Behind me, the Emperor continued his eternal vigil on the Golden Throne, not just protecting humanity from the threats of the warp, but maintaining the perfect dramatic tension that kept reality from dissolving into chaos or crystallizing into meaningless order. Chapter 5. The Xeno's Perspective. The craft world Myrmidon drifted through the void between stars, its wraithbone hull singing with psychic harmonies that existed beyond human perception. As I walked through corridors that had been grown rather than built, my enhanced senses struggled to process architecture that responded to emotion and intent rather than purely physical interaction. The very walls seemed alive, pulsing with patterns that suggested not just advanced technology, but an entirely different understanding of what technology could be. Farseer Aletok Thalinia was ancient, even by Eldar standards. Her features bearing the weight of millennia spent gazing into possible futures. When she spoke, her voice carried harmonics that bypassed my audio processors and resonated directly with whatever passed for my soul in my augmented consciousness. Mon que Magos, she began, using the Eldar term for humans, with what might have been affection rather than the usual disdain. Your species has finally produced an individual capable of understanding the greater pattern. We have been waiting for this moment for longer than your civilization has existed. The chamber we stood in defied conventional geometry, its walls displaying not images, but pure concepts made visible. I could see the branching paths of probability, the quantum threads that connected all possible outcomes, and most disturbing of all, the fundamental structure that held reality together. It was beautiful and terrible in ways that challenged my enhanced consciousness. You know, I said, though it wasn't really a question. You've always known about the function our universe serves. Known? Thelinia's laugh carried notes that spoke of eons of bitter understanding. Mon Ki, we helped design it. The eternal war of your species was not an accident or a natural development. It was carefully crafted to serve a purpose that transcends the survival of any single race. My servo skulls, which had been permitted aboard the craft world under careful restrictions, began recording data that challenged everything I thought I understood about galactic history. The displays around us showed the same mathematical principles I'd found in the foundational protocols, but rendered in ways that suggested understanding that predated human civilization by millions of years. During the height of our empire, Thelinia continued, before the birth of She Who Thirsts, we discovered that reality itself was becoming unstable. The perfection we had achieved, the elimination of suffering and conflict, was causing existence to lose the narrative coherence necessary for stability. She gestured, and the displays shifted to show images of the ancient Eldar Empire at its height. What I saw challenged every assumption about the nature of civilization and progress. The Eldar hadn't fallen because of corruption or moral decay. They had fallen because their success was threatening the fundamental structure of reality. We were forced to make a choice, Thelinia explained, her voice carrying the weight of species-wide trauma. Continue on our path toward perfect order and risk the collapse of existence itself, or deliberately introduce chaos into our civilization to maintain the balance that keeps reality stable. The implications were staggering. The birth of Slaanesh, the catastrophe that destroyed the Eldar Empire and created the Eye of Terra, hadn't been an accident. It had been a deliberate sacrifice, a species choosing its own near extinction to preserve the possibility of existence for everyone else. But humanity, I said slowly, beginning to understand the scope of what had been orchestrated, was already developing the capacity to take your place. Precisely. Thelinia's expression conveyed approval, mixed with profound sadness. Your species possessed the perfect psychological profile for maintaining eternal conflict. Heroic enough to provide hope, flawed enough to ensure ongoing struggle, adaptable enough to face any threat while never quite achieving ultimate victory. New displays materialized, showing the careful guidance that had shaped human development. I saw Eldar intervention at crucial moments in history, subtle manipulations that ensured humanity would develop along the precise psychological and cultural lines necessary to serve as reality's immune system. The Emperor's Great Crusade, the Horus Heresy, the Long War, all of it followed patterns we had calculated and prepared for. Your species took up the burden we could no longer bear, and in doing so, preserved the possibility of existence for all sentient life. I found myself reprocessing everything I thought I understood about the relationship between humans and Xenos. The eternal conflicts, the mutual hatred and misunderstanding. It was all carefully maintained to ensure that neither side achieved total victory. And the other races? I asked. The Orc, the Tyranids, the Necrons. Each serves a specific function in the greater narrative, Thelinia explained, her hands weaving complex gestures that caused new displays to appear around us. The Orcs provide endless conflict without existential threat. They fight because fighting is their nature, not because they seek to end other races. The Tyranids represent external pressure that forces unity without allowing stagnation. The Necrons embody the dangers of technological perfection, serving as a warning against the very order that threatens narrative stability. The data she showed me was beyond anything I'd encountered in Imperial archives. Detailed psychological profiles of entire species, probability calculations that showed how each race's actions contributed to the overall balance, and most disturbing of all, evidence of active coordination between supposedly hostile forces. You're saying that the wars between our species are managed, not scripted, Thane corrected, echoing what I'd heard from Dark Apostle Malachar. The conflicts are real, the deaths meaningful, the emotions genuine. But the overall pattern is guided to ensure that no single faction achieves the kind of total victory that would end the story. She led me deeper into the craft world, through chambers where Eldar seers worked with probability engines that made chaos technology look primitive. These devices didn't just monitor the balance of galactic conflict, they actively adjusted it, making minute changes to quantum fields that would influence the outcomes of battles fought centuries later. This is why your Inquisition tolerates some Xenos while purging others, Thane explained as we walked. Why some Eldar factions are permitted to survive while others are hunted to extinction. The balance requires specific elements to function properly. We entered a vast chamber where hundreds of seers sat in meditation, their consciousness linked to a network that spanned the galaxy. Each one was monitoring different aspects of the great narrative, watching for signs that any faction was becoming too successful, calculating the probability adjustments needed to maintain dramatic tension. But the cost, I said, thinking of the countless lives lost in 10 millennia of interspecies warfare, the suffering required to maintain this balance. Do you think it weighs less heavily on us because we initiated it? Thane's voice carried pain that spanned eons. Every human death in our conflicts, every Eldar soul lost to maintain the balance, every moment of anguish required to keep the story stable. We feel all of it. But the alternative is not peace, Magos. It is the absolute negation of everything. She activated a display that showed what happened in realities where the balance failed. I watched universes dissolve into the probability storm, existence becoming unstuck as every possible outcome occurred simultaneously. In those realms, the concept of individual identity became meaningless as all potential versions of every being existed at once. This is what we protect against, Thane said. Not death, not suffering, but the complete elimination of meaning itself. In our universe, pain has purpose, death has significance, conflict creates the narrative structure that allows anything to exist at all. I studied the probability equations with growing understanding. The mathematics were elegant in their brutality. Every war fought, every life lost, every moment of hope or despair contributed to the overall pattern that kept reality stable. Our suffering wasn't meaningless. It was the most meaningful thing in existence. What happens if the balance fails? I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. Then entities from outside our local reality cluster will flood through the cracks in existence, Thane replied. Things that make your chaos gods look benevolent, beings whose very presence negates the possibility of story itself. They exist in the spaces between narratives, feeding on the collapse of meaning. She showed me glimpses of these entities, beings that couldn't be properly visualized because they existed as pure negation. They were the enemy that all our wars ultimately served to keep at bay, the true darkness that made our eternal conflict not just necessary, but heroic. Why reveal this to me? I asked. Why break the illusion that keeps the story functioning? Because the balance is under threat, Thane replied, her expression growing grave. New technologies within your Imperium, the return of your Primarchs, movements toward galactic unity, all of them risk tipping the scales too far toward order. We need agents within human civilization who understand the true stakes. And if humanity achieved peace, if we ended all conflict and created a golden age, then existence itself would end within a few centuries, she said with absolute certainty. The narrative structure would collapse, reality would lose cohesion, and everything that has ever mattered would dissolve into the probability storm. As I prepared to leave Craftworld Myrmidon, Farseer Thalinia shared one final vision: a possible future where humanity achieved its greatest dream of lasting peace, only to watch in horror as reality itself began to unravel around them. "Remember this, Magos Thane-XVII," she said as my transport prepared for departure. "We are not enemies in any meaningful sense. We are co-authors of the story that makes stories possible, guardians of the narrative that allows existence to continue. Our conflicts serve a purpose greater than any single species or civilization." The journey back to Imperial space carried the weight of ultimate knowledge. I now understood that the eternal war of the 41st millennium wasn't humanity's burden. It was our gift to the cosmos, a necessary sacrifice that preserved the possibility of meaning for all sentient life. Chapter 6. The Tyrannid Paradox. The bioship. Norn Queen was unlike anything in my experience, a living vessel that pulsed with its own heartbeat while drifting through the void between galaxies. The corridors weren't built but grown, their walls breathing with a rhythm that suggested intelligence beyond anything the Imperium's xenobiological databases had catalogued. My presence here was theoretically impossible. Tyrannids didn't negotiate, didn't communicate with other species, didn't do anything except consume. Yet here I was, walking through passages lined with neural tissue that carried thoughts too vast for human comprehension. The entity that awaited me in the ship's central chamber defied classification. It appeared as a fusion of countless organisms, part hive tyrant, part Norn Queen, part something that existed beyond the boundaries of individual biology. When it spoke, the communication came not through words, but through direct neural interface that bypassed language entirely and implanted concepts directly into my consciousness. "You are the one who seeks understanding of the great pattern." The voice echoed in my mind with harmonics that made my enhanced neural interfaces struggle to maintain coherence. "We have been expecting you." My servo skulls hung motionless in the chamber, their machine spirits apparently overawed by the presence of an intelligence that operated on principles beyond their comprehension. The very air seemed alive with microscopic organisms that I realized were monitoring and analyzing my every biological function. "You can speak," I said, though the inadequacy of verbal communication in this environment was immediately apparent. "The Imperium believes your species is incapable of communication with other forms of life." The concept was difficult for my enhanced, but still essentially human mind to process. I wasn't talking to an individual tyrannid. I was being temporarily absorbed into the collective consciousness of an entire species, allowed to participate in thoughts that spanned galaxies, while retaining enough individual identity to maintain the illusion of dialogue. "You seek to understand why we exist, why we consume, why we do not simply devour all life and achieve ultimate victory," the hive mind continued. "The answer requires comprehension of functions that transcend individual species survival. Displays materialized around us, not holographic projections, but actual living tissue that rearranged itself to show visual information. What I saw was a map of galactic history spanning millions of years, showing the ebb and flow of countless civilizations, rising and falling in patterns that followed mathematical principles I recognized from the foundational protocols. "We are not destroyers," the hive mind explained as I watched the displays. "We are gardeners. When any species achieves too much success, threatens to create the perfect order that would end the story, we arrive to prune the excess growth." The implications were staggering. The Tyrannid invasions weren't random predation. They were carefully calculated interventions designed to prevent any single species from achieving the kind of lasting dominance that would threaten narrative stability. Every hive fleet that appeared in Imperial space served to maintain the balance that kept reality coherent. "But you consume worlds entirely," I said, thinking of the hundreds of planets the Imperium had lost to Tyrannid invasion. "You leave nothing behind." "Incorrect," the hive mind replied with what might have been amusement if such concepts applied to collective consciousness. We consume excess success. We devour stagnation. We eliminate the elements that threaten to end the story through achievement of perfect order. New displays showed the aftermath of Tyranid invasions in detail that Imperial records had never captured. Yes, the biological material was consumed, but something more subtle was also happening. Populations that had been growing too comfortable, too secure, too close to achieving lasting peace were forced back into the struggle that maintained narrative tension. Observe the Ultramar sector. After our pruning, the hive mind commanded, and I watched time-lapse displays showing how the region had responded to Hive Fleet Behemoth's invasion. The trauma had sparked innovation, renewed military vigilance, and a restoration of the heroic struggle that kept their civilization narratively viable. You're saying that your invasions actually strengthen the species you attack? Not all survive. The pruning, the hive mind acknowledged, but those that do emerge more capable of fulfilling their narrative function. Your space marines were forged in conflict with their own kind. Your Imperial Guard found purpose in defending against overwhelming odds. Without external pressure, both would become obsolete. The data it showed me was beyond anything in Imperial strategic analyses. Complete psychological profiles of entire civilizations, probability calculations showing how different levels of threat produced optimal narrative tension, and most disturbing of all, evidence that the Tyranids had been performing this function for millions of years across multiple galaxies. How many species have you pruned? All that achieved sufficient success to threaten the balance, came the reply. We have traveled between galaxies for eons, arriving whenever the story threatens to end through excessive order. We are the great recycler of narratives. I found myself processing the scope of what I was learning. The Tyranids weren't invaders from outside our galaxy. They were a cosmic institution, a force that maintained narrative balance across the entire universe. Their arrival in our galaxy wasn't coincidence, but a response to humanity's growing success during the Dark Age of technology. The Dark Age, I said, understanding beginning to dawn. Humanity was becoming too successful, achieving too much technological advancement. You came to prevent us from creating perfect order. Precisely, the hive mind confirmed. Your species had developed technologies that could have eliminated conflict entirely. AI that could solve all problems, genetic engineering that could perfect biology, weapons that could achieve total victory. The story was approaching premature conclusion. The displays showed me glimpses of the dark age of technology, from a perspective that challenged everything the Imperium taught about that period. I saw not a golden age destroyed by human folly, but a civilization that had become too perfect, too ordered, too close to achieving the kind of lasting peace that would have ended the narrative that kept reality stable. But you didn't destroy humanity entirely, I observed. You left us capable of rebuilding. The pruning must be precise, the hive mind explained. Total destruction ends the story through failure, rather than success. Both outcomes threaten narrative stability. We reduce civilizations to levels where they can resume the eternal struggle without risk of ultimate resolution. I thought of the long night that followed the Dark Age, of humanity's reduction to feudal barbarism, of the slow rebuilding under the Emperor's guidance. All of it had been calibrated to return our species to a state where meaningful conflict was possible. And now, I asked, why haven't you completed your current invasion of Imperial space? Because the balance currently maintains itself, the hive mind replied. Your species exists in optimal narrative tension, constantly threatened but never quite defeated, achieving victories, but never ultimate success. Our active intervention is only required when this balance shifts too far in either direction. The displays shifted to show current galactic conditions, mapping the conflicts between Imperium, Chaos, and various Xenos factions. It was beautiful in its complexity, a vast web of interconnected struggles that created exactly the kind of dramatic tension required to maintain reality's coherence. Your recent technological advances, the return of your Primarchs, the formation of new alliances, all represent potential threats to the balance, the hive mind continued. We monitor these developments and stand ready to intervene if necessary. But you prefer not to intervene. Intervention requires consumption, the hive mind explained, with what might have been regret. When we prune a civilization, we absorb its biological and technological distinctiveness. Each species consumed reduces the diversity that makes stories interesting. We preserve what we can, but some loss is inevitable. I realized that the Tyranids weren't the mindless destroyers of Imperial propaganda, but cosmic librarians with a terrible duty. They preserved the biological and technological achievements of the species they were forced to prune, maintaining a vast collection of evolutionary possibilities against the day when they might be needed again. The bioforms you create from consumed species, they're not just weapons. They are memories, the hive mind confirmed. Every species we have been forced to prune lives on in our forms, their distinctive characteristics, preserved and honored even as their civilizations are reduced to sustainable levels. The moral complexity of what I was learning challenged every certainty I'd held about good and evil. The Tyranids were simultaneously the greatest threat to human survival and the guardians of humanity's continued existence. They preserved what they consumed while ensuring that no species achieved the kind of perfect success that would threaten existence itself. What would happen if you failed? If you allowed a species to achieve ultimate order? The displays around me shifted to show scenarios that made my enhanced consciousness recoil. I watched timelines where perfect civilizations achieved total peace, only to see reality itself begin to unravel as the narrative tension that held it together disappeared. Existence requires story, the hive mind explained. Story requires conflict. Conflict requires imperfection. When any element threatens to achieve perfection, we restore the imperfection that makes existence possible. As my time aboard the bioship drew to a close, the hive mind shared one final revelation that changed everything about how I viewed my mission. You have been chosen to help maintain the balance from within your own species. Use your knowledge to prevent humanity from achieving the perfect success that would require our intervention. Better that the story continue through internal struggle than end through external pruning. The transport that carried me back to Imperial space bore the weight of ultimate responsibility. I was no longer just protecting humanity from external threats. I was protecting it from its own potential success, ensuring that the eternal war continued because the alternative was not peace, but the complete negation of existence itself. Chapter 7. The Necron Archive. The tomb world of Solemnus existed in a state of temporal flux that challenged every understanding of physics my augmented consciousness possessed. As I walked through corridors carved from living metal that had survived 65 million years without corrosion, my chronometer implants registered temporal anomalies that suggested time itself flowed differently here. The walls bore hieroglyphs that rewrote themselves as I watched, mathematical formulas and historical records updating in real time as the universe continued its ancient dance. Trazyn the Infinite was not what I had expected from the Necron archives, where Imperial doctrine taught that all Necrons were soulless machines driven only by ancient programming. I found an entity whose consciousness spanned eons and whose collection represented the accumulated wisdom of a species that had witnessed the birth and death of countless civilizations. Ah, Magos Thane-XVII. Trazyn's voice carried harmonics that spoke of technologies beyond human comprehension. The seeker of ultimate truths. I have been expecting you for precisely 4,732 years, 6 months, and 11 days. Your arrival was calculated to the nanosecond. The gallery we stood in defied architectural possibility. Displays stretched into infinite distance, each one containing preserved specimens from across galactic history. I saw space marines from the Great Crusade, Eldar from before the fall, even humans from the Dark Age of technology, all perfectly preserved in temporal stasis fields. You collect moments, I observed, my enhanced visual processors struggling to catalogue the scope of what I was witnessing. Fragments of history preserved in perfect detail. I collect stories, Thane corrected with what might have been pride. Each specimen represents a crucial narrative moment, a decision that shaped galactic history, a sacrifice that defined a species, a victory that changed the course of civilizations. I am the curator of meaning itself. He led me deeper into the gallery, past displays that showed the rise and fall of species whose names had been forgotten by the current galaxy. Each exhibit was labeled with temporal coordinates and narrative significance ratings that used mathematical formulas I recognized from the foundational protocols. Your species fascinates me, Thane continued as we walked. In 65 million years of observation, I have never encountered a civilization so perfectly calibrated for eternal conflict. Most species either achieve order too quickly or collapse into chaos too completely. Humanity maintains the precise balance necessary for optimal narrative function. We stopped before a display containing what appeared to be a perfect recreation of the Horus Heresy's climactic battle aboard the Vengeful Spirit. But as I looked closer, I realized this wasn't just a diorama. It was a temporal snapshot, a moment of actual history preserved in perfect stasis. The moment reality crystallized into its current pattern, Thane explained. The Emperor's decision to allow his own wounding, Horus's choice to embrace corruption, Sanguinius's sacrifice, all of it perfectly orchestrated to create the eternal war that maintains narrative stability. You were there? I asked, though the evidence was undeniable. I have been observing your species since its emergence from Terra, Thane replied. The Necrons remember the time before the current pattern was established, when reality itself was different. We have seen what happens when the balance fails. He activated new displays showing historical periods that predated human civilization by millions of years. What I saw was a galaxy locked in perfect stasis, advanced civilizations that had achieved total order, ending all conflict and creating technological paradises where suffering was unknown. Observe what follows, Thane instructed, and the displays showed the aftermath of such achievements. I watched as reality itself began to destabilize, as the absence of narrative tension caused existence to lose coherence. Stars went out not because they ran out of fuel, but because the story that gave them meaning had ended. The old ones understood this principle, Thane continued. They designed the current pattern of galactic conflict specifically to prevent such collapses. The war between our kind and theirs was not just territorial dispute, it was a deliberate attempt to establish permanent narrative tension. The implications were staggering. The ancient war in heaven, the foundational conflict that shaped the galaxy before humanity even existed, had been deliberately orchestrated to create the conditions necessary for reality's stability. The Necrons and their enemies had sacrificed their own civilizations to establish the eternal war that kept existence coherent. But you survived, I observed. Your species endured the transition. We became curators rather than participants, Thane explained. The Necron race accepted transformation into living metal not just to escape death, but to serve as guardians of the pattern we helped establish. We monitor galactic conflicts, preserve crucial narrative moments, and intervene when the balance threatens to shift too far in any direction. He led me to another section of the gallery where displays showed more recent history. I saw moments from the Age of Strife, the Great Crusade, and the Horus Heresy, all preserved with perfect fidelity. But more disturbing were displays showing events that hadn't happened yet, potential futures catalogued with the same precision as established history. Temporal mechanics become fluid when narrative stability is involved, Thane explained, noting my confusion. The pattern requires certain events to occur, certain choices to be made. We preserve these moments not just as they happen, but as they must happen to maintain the balance. I studied a display showing what appeared to be my own future, scenes of me working with various factions to prevent technologies that might end the eternal war. The detail was perfect, down to conversations I hadn't had yet with individuals I hadn't met. Free will still exists, Thane assured me. The specific details of how events unfold remain subject to individual choice, but the overall pattern must be maintained, and certain pivotal moments are mathematically inevitable. We entered a chamber that contained the most advanced technology I had ever witnessed, machines that operated on principles beyond even theoretical understanding. These devices weren't just monitoring reality, they were actively maintaining its coherence, making minute adjustments to quantum fields that influenced probability across the galaxy. The foundational protocols, I said, recognizing the mathematical principles that governed the machine's operation. Indeed, the instructions left by the old ones for maintaining the pattern they established. Your species was guided to discover fragments of this knowledge when the balance required adjustment, but the complete protocols have been preserved here since the War in Heaven. Thane activated a display that showed the full scope of the protocols, mathematical formulas that described not just how reality maintained its coherence, but how that coherence could be adjusted when necessary. It was the ultimate manual for cosmic engineering, a guide to reshaping existence itself. Why show me this? I asked. Why reveal knowledge that could fundamentally alter the nature of reality? Because the pattern is under threat, Thane replied, his voice carrying undertones that spoke of genuine concern. New technologies within your Imperium, the return of your Primarchs, movements toward galactic unity, all of them risk tipping the balance too far toward order. The protocols may need to be invoked to prevent narrative collapse. The displays shifted to show probability analyses of current galactic conditions. I watched as mathematical models demonstrated how various technological and political developments could lead to scenarios where the eternal war ended, and with it, the narrative tension that kept reality stable. The Primarch returns were calculated to provide hope without resolution, Thane explained. But if too many return, if they achieve actual unity among human factions, the story may conclude prematurely. Similarly, certain technologies being developed could eliminate the conflicts that define your species' narrative function. I thought of the work being done in Mechanicus Forge worlds, of the innovations that could potentially end humanity's reliance on constant warfare. Now I understood why such progress had to be carefully controlled, not because the technology was dangerous in itself, but because success could be more destructive than any failure. What would intervention look like? I asked, though I suspected the answer would be as disturbing as everything else I'd learned. Selective preservation, Thane replied matter-of-factly. Key individuals and technologies would be removed from the timeline before they could destabilize the pattern. They would be preserved here, in stasis, until such time as their reintroduction would enhance rather than threaten narrative stability. The casual way he discussed removing people from history sent feedback spikes through my neural interfaces. Yet I understood the logic. Better to preserve individuals in temporal stasis than allow their success to end existence itself. The archives contain many such preservations, Thane continued, leading me to a section of the gallery I hadn't noticed before. Scientists whose discoveries would have ended conflict too quickly, leaders whose unity would have eliminated necessary division, technologies that would have made warfare obsolete. I saw displays containing figures from throughout galactic history, humans, Eldar, and others whose achievements had been deemed too successful for the stability of the pattern. They existed in perfect preservation, their consciousness suspended but intact, waiting for the day when their abilities might be needed without threatening the balance. Is this my fate? I asked. If my knowledge threatens the pattern, only if you fail to use it wisely, Thane replied. Your role is to help maintain the balance from within your own species, to guide humanity away from the dangerous successes that would require external intervention. The choice remains yours. As our meeting drew to a close, Thane shared one final revelation that recontextualized everything I thought I understood about purpose and meaning. The eternal war is not humanity's curse, Magos. It is your species' greatest gift to the universe. Every battle you fight, every sacrifice you make, every moment of heroism or tragedy you experience, all of it serves to maintain the story, that allows existence to continue. Without your conflicts, reality itself would become impossible. The transport that carried me away from solemnness bore the weight of ultimate knowledge. I now understood that the 41st millennium's darkness wasn't a failure of human civilization, but its greatest success. A carefully maintained narrative that preserved the possibility of meaning for all sentient life. Chapter 8. The Eternal Guardian. The return journey to Forge World Metallica carried the weight of ultimate knowledge that transformed my understanding of everything I had believed about purpose, duty, and the nature of existence itself. As my transport vessel navigated the familiar warp routes toward home, I found myself processing not just data, but the fundamental revision of my identity from tech priest to something far more complex, a guardian of reality itself. The workshops of Metallica hummed with their eternal rhythm when I finally arrived. But now I heard something different in the machine song. Where once I had perceived only the blessed harmony of mechanical perfection, now I recognized the deliberate imperfections that kept the narrative stable. Servo skulls that occasionally malfunctioned, cogitators that required constant maintenance, manufacturing processes that produced weapons just reliable enough to fight eternal war, but never perfect enough to end it decisively. Magos Dominus Vex Korth greeted me in the same sanctum where my journey had begun, but his optical arrays held new depth as they focused on me. Explorator Thane-XVII, he said, using my old rank with what might have been nostalgia. Or should I say, Guardian of the Eternal Balance. Your transformation is complete. The hololithic displays that materialized around us no longer showed simple technical schematics or exploration data. Instead, they revealed the vast network of individuals throughout the galaxy who carried the same knowledge I now possessed. Tech priests who guided technology development to maintain optimal conflict levels. Inquisitors who eliminated threats to narrative stability. Even chaos champions who ensured that neither order nor disorder achieved total dominance. How many know the truth? I asked, though I had begun to suspect the answer was both larger and smaller than I'd imagined. Fewer than 10,000 across the entire galaxy, Vex Korth replied. Carefully selected individuals from every faction, every species, every level of society. We are the invisible administrators of existence itself, ensuring that the story continues without those who live it understanding their crucial role. I studied the network diagrams with growing appreciation for the scope of what was being maintained. From individual tech priests deliberately introducing flaws into weapon designs, to chapter masters making tactical decisions that ensured eternal stalemate rather than decisive victory, thousands of small adjustments constantly fine-tuned the balance that kept reality stable. What happens now? I asked, though I suspected my role was already determined by forces beyond any individual choice. Now you take your place among the Eternal Guardians, Vex Korth explained. Your analytical capabilities and psychological profile make you ideal for monitoring the developments that could threaten narrative stability. You will continue your duties as an explorator, but with a deeper understanding of what technologies must be found, suppressed, or carefully regulated. He activated new displays showing current projects across the Mechanicus that represented potential threats to the balance. Advanced AI research that could make human decision-making obsolete. Genetic therapies that could eliminate the flaws that made conflict inevitable. Weapons systems that could achieve such decisive superiority that warfare itself would become meaningless. Each of these requires careful management, Vex Korth continued, not destruction. The knowledge itself is valuable and may be needed when the balance requires adjustment, but their implementation must be controlled to ensure they enhance rather than eliminate the narrative tension that maintains reality. I found myself accepting the responsibility with a sense of purpose that transcended anything I had felt serving the Omnissiah alone. This wasn't just about preserving human civilization or advancing technological knowledge. It was about maintaining the fundamental conditions that made existence possible. The Primarchs, I said, thinking of the greatest immediate threat to stability. Their returns provide hope, but if too many return, precisely the kind of problem you will monitor, Vex Korth confirmed. Each Primarch's return is carefully calculated to provide exactly the right amount of hope and capability to maintain optimal dramatic tension. Too few, and despair could end the story through failure. Too many, and success could end it through resolution. The mathematics were elegant in their complexity. I saw probability models showing how different combinations of returning Primarchs would affect galactic conflict levels, psychological analyses of how their presence would influence human morale, and most crucially, calculations showing the precise point where hope would become certainty and threaten the balance. There are others, I said, thinking of all the factions I had encountered. Chaos, Eldar, Necrons, Tyranids, all working toward the same goal despite appearing to be enemies. The greatest secret of our universe, Vexkorth agreed. Every faction believes itself to be fighting for victory, and in a sense they are. But victory is defined not as the defeat of enemies, but as the maintenance of the conditions that allow victory to remain meaningful. We fight to preserve the possibility of fighting. He showed me deeper levels of the coordination network, revealing how information flowed between supposedly hostile factions. Chaos champions who received warnings about Imperial technologies that could disrupt the balance, Eldar Farseers who shared probability calculations with Necron tomb worlds, Tyranid hive fleets that adjusted their invasion patterns based on data from Mechanicus monitoring stations. The eternal war is not a conflict between enemies, Vexkorth explained. It is a collaborative performance by cosmic actors playing their roles to maintain the story that keeps existence stable. Every faction must appear to seek total victory, while actually working to ensure such victory never occurs. The moral complexity was staggering. I was being asked to ensure that human suffering continued not out of malice or indifference, but as an act of cosmic preservation. Every space marine who died in battle, every world lost to invasion, every citizen who lived in fear, all of it served to maintain the narrative coherence that prevented far worse fates. How do we justify this to ourselves? I asked. How do we live with the knowledge that we perpetuate suffering to prevent something worse? By understanding that the alternative is not peace, but absolute negation, Vexkorth replied, with the weight of millennia behind his words. In realities where the eternal war ended through either total order or total chaos, existence itself became impossible. Not just life or consciousness, but the very concept of is versus is not collapsed into meaninglessness. He showed me recordings from the archive of possible futures, displaying timelines where various factions had achieved ultimate victory. In every case, the initial celebration was followed by reality decay as the narrative tension that held existence together was removed. I watched universes where perfect peace led to gradual disintegration of the laws of physics themselves. The suffering is real, Vexkorth acknowledged. The pain and loss and fear are genuine human experiences with genuine meaning, but they exist within a framework that gives them ultimate purpose, the preservation of the possibility for meaning to exist at all. As I prepared to take up my new responsibilities, Vexkorth shared the final protocols that would guide my work as an eternal guardian. First, no faction must be allowed to achieve decisive advantage that would end the conflict. Second, technological developments must be guided to enhance the war's complexity without resolving it. Third, individual heroism and sacrifice must be preserved and honored while ensuring their ultimate effects maintain balance rather than disruption. Fourth, the truth of our purpose must be protected while ensuring enough guardians exist to maintain the pattern. The weight of these responsibilities settled over me like the gravity of a neutron star, but also with a sense of profound purpose. I was no longer just a servant of the Omnissiah or a protector of humanity. I was a guardian of the story that made stories possible, ensuring that the narrative framework of existence itself continued. Remember, Vexkorth said as I prepared to leave, we do not serve any particular faction or ideology. We serve the eternal dance between order and chaos, the perpetual tension between hope and despair, the ongoing conflict that generates the meaning that keeps reality coherent. All other loyalties are secondary to this fundamental duty. The workshops of Metallica resumed their familiar rhythm as I returned to my duties. But now I heard the deeper music, the careful calibration of imperfection that made perfection possible, the deliberate maintenance of struggle that preserved the capacity for triumph. Every servo skull that required maintenance, every weapon that needed constant adjustment, every technology that remained just beyond perfect reliability, all of it served the greater purpose of maintaining the story that allowed anything to exist at all. In the depths of space, the wars of the 41st millennium continued their eternal dance. Space Marines battled Chaos forces with heroic determination while carefully ensuring no decisive victory occurred. Tyrannid hive fleets consumed worlds while leaving sufficient survivors to maintain narrative continuity. Eldar Farseers guided probability while ensuring their interventions enhanced rather than resolved conflicts. And throughout it all, a small network of Eternal Guardians worked to maintain the delicate balance that kept reality stable, understanding that their universe's greatest gift to existence was not peace or prosperity, but the eternal war that made peace and prosperity meaningful concepts. The grim darkness of the far future, where there was only war, wasn't humanity's failure to achieve a better existence. It was our species' perfect success at creating the narrative framework that allowed existence itself to continue. In the end, that was why the universe needed Warhammer 40K to exist, not as fiction, but as the fundamental reality that preserved the possibility of all other realities. The Eternal War was not just our burden, it was our benediction, a gift we gave to the cosmos by maintaining the story that kept the story itself from ending. 3 months after accepting my role as an Eternal Guardian, I found myself standing in a chamber that officially didn't exist, buried beneath the deepest levels of Terra itself. The Sanctum Narrativa was older than the Imperial Palace above, its construction dating back to the dark age of technology, when humanity first encountered the mathematical principles that governed reality's stability. The chamber's walls were inscribed with equations that seemed to write themselves, constantly updating probability matrices that tracked every major conflict across the galaxy. Lord Commander Guilliman stood beside me, his massive frame somehow diminished by the weight of knowledge that pressed against us both. His expression carried the same haunted quality I'd noticed during our first meeting in the throne room, but now I understood its source. He wasn't just carrying the burden of ruling the Imperium, he was shouldering the responsibility for maintaining existence itself. "The network runs deeper than you initially understood," Guilliman said, his voice carrying harmonics that spoke of augmentations beyond even what the Adeptus Mechanicus typically installed. "What you've learned about the factions working together is merely the surface layer of a coordination system that spans not just our galaxy, but multiple reality clusters." The hololithic displays that materialized around us showed a web of communication that defied everything I thought I knew about the universe's structure. Quantum entanglement networks connected not just different regions of our galaxy, but different versions of our galaxy existing in parallel dimensional frameworks. Each one maintained its own version of the Eternal War, but all were coordinated to ensure maximum narrative stability across what the displays labeled as Local Reality Cluster Omega-7. "Multiple universes?" I asked, though my enhanced consciousness was already beginning to process the implications. "All running variations of the same story?" "Precisely," Guilliman confirmed. "The Warhammer 40,000 framework has proven so effective at maintaining reality cohesion that it's been replicated across numerous parallel dimensions. Each universe runs slightly different versions of the same conflicts, providing redundancy against narrative collapse while exploring alternative story paths. I studied the data streams flowing between universes, noting how information about successful plot developments in one reality was shared with others to optimize dramatic tension. In one parallel dimension, the Horus Heresy had lasted 3 centuries instead of 7 years, providing data on extended conflict sustainability. In another, different Primarchs had fallen to chaos, creating alternative balance calculations. "The Emperor's true purpose," I said, understanding beginning to dawn. "He wasn't just unifying humanity in our reality, he was establishing the template that would be replicated across the multiverse." The master of mankind saw farther than any of us initially comprehended, Guilliman replied with obvious reverence. His sacrifice on the Golden Throne doesn't just maintain our reality's stability, it serves as the central processing node for coordinating narrative balance across all parallel versions of our universe. New displays showed the scope of the Emperor's ongoing work. From the Golden Throne, his consciousness simultaneously monitored dozens of parallel realities, making minute adjustments to probability fields that influence the outcomes of countless conflicts. Every decision made by every faction in every universe was subtly guided to maintain optimal dramatic tension across the entire reality cluster. This is why the throne must never fail, Guilliman continued. Not just because our Imperium would fall, but because the collapse of our reality would create cascading failures across the entire cluster. Billions of parallel universes would lose their narrative coherence and dissolve into the probability storm. The weight of this revelation was almost overwhelming. Our universe wasn't just protecting local reality, we were the anchor point for an entire multidimensional network of stories, each one depending on our continued existence for their own stability. As we delved deeper into the sanctum, Guilliman led me to a section I hadn't noticed before. Displays that showed threats operating outside the established narrative framework. These weren't the familiar enemies of the Imperium, but entities that existed in the spaces between stories, feeding on the collapse of meaning itself. The entropy cultists, Guilliman explained with obvious distaste. Beings from collapsed realities who seek to spread their condition to stable universes. They understand the narrative framework that maintains our existence, and they work actively to disrupt it. The displays showed intelligence that chilled my enhanced consciousness. These entities had once been inhabitants of realities like ours, but when their narrative frameworks collapsed, they had become something else entirely. Creatures that existed as pure negation, whose very presence undermined the dramatic tension necessary for story coherence. They infiltrate stable realities through dimensional weak points, Guilliman continued, usually appearing during moments of extreme narrative stress. Their goal is to eliminate the conflicts that maintain reality, not through victory, but through the destruction of meaning itself. I watched tactical analyses showing how these entities operated. Unlike conventional enemies who fought to achieve specific objectives, entropy cultists worked to make objectives meaningless. They attacked heroes and villains equally, seeking to eliminate the moral frameworks that gave conflict purpose. How do we fight enemies whose goal is to make fighting pointless? I asked, though I suspected the answer would be as complex as everything else I'd learned. Very carefully, Guilliman replied. Direct confrontation often plays into their strategy, as conventional warfare against them tends to prove their point about the futility of conflict. Instead, we maintain narrative integrity through perfect adherence to our roles, ensuring that every battle retains meaning despite their attempts to drain it away. The display shifted to show current infiltration attempts across our reality cluster. I saw entropy cultist agents working within various factions, not to make them lose, but to make them stop caring about victory or defeat. Space Marine chapters losing their sense of purpose. Chaos cults abandoning their gods for pure nihilism. Even tyrannid bioforms developing behavioral patterns that prioritized meaningless consumption over strategic advancement. The recent movements toward peace within some imperial sectors, I said, connecting patterns I'd been monitoring. The diplomatic overtures with some Xenos factions. The technological developments that could end conflict. How much of that is natural evolution versus infiltration? More than we'd prefer, less than they'd hope, Guilliman replied cryptically. The natural tendency of any civilization is to seek peace and prosperity. But when that tendency is artificially amplified, when it becomes so overwhelming that it overrides the dramatic necessities that maintain reality, we begin to suspect external influence. He showed me reports from across the galaxy. Imperial governors suddenly losing interest in territorial expansion, Space Marine chapters developing pacifist tendencies, even Orc warbands beginning to question the purpose of warfare. Each incident seemed minor in isolation, but together they represented a coordinated attempt to undermine the narrative framework that kept existence stable. This is why your role as an eternal guardian has become so crucial, Guilliman continued. traditional threats we can address through conventional means. But entities that attack the very concept of conflict require agents who understand both the tactical and philosophical dimensions of the war we're fighting. The deepest levels of the Sanctum Narrativa contained archives that challenged my understanding, not just of reality, but of consciousness itself. Here, preserved in crystalline matrices that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, were the philosophical weapons that the Eternal Guardians used to combat threats to narrative coherence. Ideas, Guilliman explained as we walked among displays showing pure concepts rendered visible. The most powerful weapons in existence. Every conflict begins with an idea about what's worth fighting for, what victory means, what defeat represents. Control those concepts, and you control the reality they create. The archives contained thousands of philosophical frameworks, each one designed to maintain specific aspects of narrative stability. I saw treatises on the necessity of heroic sacrifice, mathematical proofs of why perfection was inherently unstable, and conceptual weapons designed to counter nihilistic thinking patterns. When entropy cultists attack meaning itself, Guilliman continued, we respond with meaning reinforcement. Every act of heroism in our universe becomes ammunition against their nihilistic assault. Every sacrifice, every moment of hope, maintained despite overwhelming odds. Every choice to continue fighting when surrender would be easier. All of it strengthens the narrative framework they're trying to destroy. I studied a display showing real-time philosophical combat occurring across the galaxy. Imperial Guard regiments maintaining morale despite impossible odds, their determination providing conceptual energy that reinforced local reality. Space Marine chapters embracing their duty even when victory seemed meaningless, their dedication serving as anchors for narrative coherence. But how do we maintain this without falling into the trap of blind fanaticism? I asked. If we fight simply because fighting must continue, don't we risk becoming the very meaninglessness we're trying to prevent? The finest edge we walk, Guilliman admitted with obvious strain. Every Guardian faces this challenge. How to maintain passionate commitment to conflicts we know are ultimately collaborative performances. The answer lies in understanding that the performance itself has ultimate meaning, even if individual battles are orchestrated. He activated displays showing the psychological profiles of successful Eternal Guardians across galactic history. What I saw were individuals who had achieved a paradoxical state, complete dedication to their roles, combined with perfect understanding that those roles were chosen rather than imposed. We fight because fighting preserves the possibility of everything we value, Guilliman explained. Love, honor, sacrifice, hope, even peace itself. All of these concepts can only exist within a reality that maintains narrative coherence. By preserving the eternal war, we preserve the framework that makes all other values possible. As our journey through the Sanctum Narrativa neared its end, Guilliman led me to the chamber's heart, a massive crystalline structure that seemed to exist in all dimensions simultaneously. Within its faceted depths, I could see the entire pattern that governed not just our reality cluster, but the fundamental structure of existence itself. The eternal engine, Guilliman announced with reverence that transcended his usual stoicism. The mathematical heart of everything that is, was, or ever could be. This is why the universe needs Warhammer 40,000 to exist, not as fiction, but as the fundamental narrative framework that makes fiction itself possible. The engine showed me visions that challenged every assumption about the nature of reality. I saw the birth of consciousness itself, emerging from the first story told by the first sentient being to make sense of existence. I watched as that story became the template for reality's structure, requiring constant retelling to maintain its stability. Every universe, every possible reality, every thought that has ever been thought, Guilliman explained, exists because stories create the framework for existence. But stories require conflict, require choice, require the possibility that things could be different. Without these elements, reality collapses back into the undifferentiated potential from which it emerged. The scope was beyond anything I had imagined. Our universe didn't just protect local reality, it served as the archetypal story that made all stories possible. Every myth, every legend, every narrative that had ever given meaning to existence drew its power from the fundamental pattern we maintained through eternal war. This is why the suffering matters, Guilliman continued, his voice carrying the weight of ultimate understanding. Not because it's good in itself, but because it creates the dramatic tension that allows goodness to exist as a meaningful concept. Without the possibility of loss, victory becomes meaningless. Without the reality of pain, joy becomes impossible. I found myself processing not just information, but a complete revision of what it meant to exist. We weren't just biological entities struggling for survival in a hostile universe. We were conscious participants in the ongoing creation of reality itself. Each choice we made, adding new threads to the story that held existence together. As I prepared to leave the Sanctum Narrativa and return to my duties as both Tech Priest and Eternal Guardian, Guilliman shared the final revelation that would guide my work for the remainder of my existence. Remember, Magos Thane-XVII, that knowledge of the pattern doesn't diminish its power, it enhances it. Every battle you fight, with full understanding of its purpose, becomes more meaningful, not less. Every sacrifice made with awareness of its cosmic significance carries greater weight, not lesser. The transport that carried me back to the surface bore me toward a life transformed by understanding. I would return to Forge World Metallica, continue my research into ancient technologies, and maintain my role as an explorator of the Mechanicus. But now every action would be informed by the knowledge that I was participating in the greatest work ever undertaken, the preservation of existence itself. In the workshops and laboratories where I would spend my remaining centuries, I would see the deeper purpose behind every imperfection, every struggle, every moment of triumph or failure. The servo skulls that occasionally malfunctioned weren't just products of inferior manufacturing. They were perfect expressions of the necessary imperfection that kept reality stable. The weapons that required constant maintenance weren't engineering failures. They were masterpieces of narrative necessity. And in the vast darkness of space, where the wars of the 41st millennium continued their eternal dance, I would know that every battle fought, every life lost, every hero's sacrifice, and every villain's defeat served the ultimate purpose of maintaining the story that made all stories possible. The grim darkness of the far future wasn't humanity's failure to achieve paradise. It was our species' perfect success at creating the narrative framework that preserved the possibility of paradise existing as a meaningful concept. In a universe where there was only war, we had achieved the greatest victory possible, ensuring that victory itself remained a possibility worth fighting for. The Emperor protects, the ancient litany proclaimed. But now I understood what he truly protected. Not just humanity, not just the Imperium, but the fundamental structure of existence itself. From the Golden Throne, his consciousness maintained the eternal war that kept the eternal possibility of peace from destroying itself through its own achievement. And I, Magos Explorator Thane-XVII, Eternal Guardian of the narrative framework, would continue that work until my augmented systems finally failed and my consciousness returned to the machine spirit of the universe itself. For in the end, we were all part of the same great machine. The universe telling the story of its own existence, ensuring through conflict and struggle that the story never ended, and thus that existence never ceased to be possible. In the grim darkness of the far future, there was only war. And that war was the universe's greatest gift to itself, the eternal story that made all other stories possible.